Which country or region has the best landscaping on Earth? Let's talk about it. If you travel through different parts of the world or even different regions of each country, you're going to see so many cool different ways to create gardens and landscape spaces. So let me tell you about my personal favorite and why it's my favorite. And that's the Japanese garden. I don't think that any other country on earth has put more thought into everything that goes into the design of a garden and how you interact with it. So the first thing you'll notice about the Japanese garden are the pathways. Every good quality garden has multiple pathways that will lead you on a journey as you experience the garden. And one thing you'll know is that everything has a purpose in the garden. They don't just do things just willy-nilly over there. There are two things, specifically two pathways in the Japanese garden, that are really, really cool. One is you're never going to see a straight path in these gardens. They're always going to be meandering and have curves and have things you need to step over. And this is to slow you down as you walk through the garden, which creates a moment of reflection where you can just be a little more curious and slow and peaceful as you walk through the garden. The other thing that's really cool is oftentimes these pathways will disappear around a corner because this piques your curiosity. It invites you to travel further into the garden space and see what's lying ahead or around that corner or around the bins. And everything, and I mean everything in the Japanese garden is metaphorical. So these pathways are going to be really representations of the different paths that you'll take in life and the mysteries that lie ahead in our future. The next thing I love about these garden spaces is their use of evergreen plants. The Western garden relies a lot more heavily on perennials and annuals and things that lose their leaves in the winter. In the Japanese garden, you're going to see that the plant selection might be upwards of 80% or more evergreen plants. And this gives a sense of stability and something that's always present in the garden. And then it also just looks really nice year round, where you're not dealing with a bunch of plants that lose their foliage in the winter. The other thing that the evergreens do is they set a stage or a background for your plants that do flower, and it makes it more dramatic. So when you have that cherry blossom tree erupt in the spring, or the orange foliage of a maple in the fall that's set against that dark evergreen background, it's just something that you really can't find anywhere else in the garden. It is so cool. And speaking of that, those plants that have those very distinct season changes are used as focal points in the garden. And that's to remind the people of the changing of the seasons and the different stages in throughout the year and in their lives. Another thing I love is a concept called miniaturization. And so that's where they'll take representations of larger landscapes and put them into the garden. For example, boulders represent mountains, streams represent rivers, and little ponds in the garden will represent lakes. And they will also prune the trees in the landscape to give them a sense of age, even if the trees are smaller. It's similar to bonsai, except for being potted plants. These are actually trees that are growing in the landscape. The other thing I love are the man-made elements that you'll see in a Japanese garden. I'm talking about bridges, I'm talking about statuaries, and even buildings that may be in or around the garden. And the thing is, these elements are usually built out of stone, wood, or concrete, and that gives them that very earthy feel. And even though they are man-made elements in the garden, it really is a way of connecting the people to the garden, and it just gives it that earthy and I don't know, it's just another way of expressing art and beauty within the garden as nature merges with mankind. The other thing I love about these gardens is they are never symmetrical. And this is starkly in contrast to the Western European gardens that you would see that were so straight line and symmetrical, and everything had to be balanced and lined up in perfectly straight rows. And not only is this a reminder that life is not going to be perfect and symmetrical and balanced, but it also helps to maintain the gardens in a much easier way. I mean, just imagine if you have a perfectly symmetrical garden or a long hedgerow and then one plant dies. It's almost impossible to actually replace that plant and make it look good and fit into the balanced and symmetrical mindset of the garden. And this last bit is actually my favorite part about these gardens, and that is the use of water in the garden. Water represents purity, renewal, and the flow of life. And so oftentimes there will be streams or koi ponds or little creeks, fountains, or sometimes they don't use water at all. But instead they will use gravel or sand or rocks that will represent flowing water in the garden. The point of this video is not just an appreciation for the Japanese garden, but it's also so that you can think about some of these landscaping principles for your own home and think about the intentionality behind every piece and every movement in your garden.